Have you ever wondered what really goes on inside the leaves of your plants? Your monsteras, your philodendrons, your syngoniums, your anthuriums, your cacti and succulents. Stick around with me and let's dive into a very interesting but also kind of need to know topic. Hi, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me, it's tropical houseplants. So yes, today I'm struggling to say let's go back to basics, because I don't think it's necessarily basic information, but I think it's information that is valuable to the nth degree for anybody who is growing houseplants, any type of plants really, or even people that have got a passing interest in how the world works around plants, or more specifically, how plants work. So things like light, gases, waters, and sugars, and how all of these things come together in the symphony that is photosynthesis. So yes, photosynthesis in its most basic form, at least coming from like the Greek origins of the word, is photo, which is light, synthesis, which is to synthesize something. It is basically to bring together the light and make something with it. As some people might know, some people might not know, the way that a lot of the plants get their nutrition is through a process called photosynthesis. The clue is in the name. The plants do something with the light that they're exposed to. In essence, it is how the plants make their food. It is a very simple, there is a very convoluted kind of explanation and formula for this, but in its most basic form, it is CO2, water, and light equals glucose and oxygen. Byproduct. So this is why a lot of the times people are like, oh, get houseplants in your environment because it will help the air quality. This has been debunked several times over by much more ingenious scientists that are not me. Where yes, there was a NASA bit of research, I think it was, from many years back, where it was saying having plants within an enclosed environment will increase levels of oxygen and decrease levels of CO2. Kind of makes sense. If a plant needs CO2 in order to photosynthesize, make its food, and it releases oxygen as a byproduct of that glucose, sugar, in layman's terms, very layman's terms. No scientists come to me for this one, but I'm trying to make this understandable for most people. Even people that didn't do sciences in school, hopefully this will kind of give you a bit of an overview of something that is kind of important really. But yes, this all was to say that in a very specific environment where there's an awful lot of plants and it's not a very large enclosed space, yes, this can happen. The reality in your space is, say your bedroom, you would need to have thousands of plants in your bedroom, which is not feasible for most people, in order to fractionally get the effects of this. It doesn't mean that the effect isn't there, it just means that you noticing it isn't going to be something that's going to happen. But let's break down that equation a bit more. So CO2, where does that come from? The air. A lot of people that maybe haven't done science before don't necessarily always know that the air that we breathe in isn't just oxygen. It is a mixture of gases. Ironically enough, I think, if I'm not mistaken, nitrogen gas is one of the biggest components of the air around us. So there's nitrogen, if I'm not mistaken, I will correct myself. Nitrogen, CO2, and oxygen. So CO2 is carbon dioxide, so it's one singular carbon and two oxygens that are joined together, and that is around us, and that is what the plants are pulling from. And as I was alluding earlier on, us as humans, when we're kind of breathing in and out, we breathe in and take in and utilize the oxygen. We're breathing in the other gases as well, but we take in and utilize the oxygen, and then we exhale a lot of the other gases as well as CO2, which means that the oxygen has been used by our system and then we are expelling CO2. So you understand why there is a benefit to us as humans having plants around, because the plants are utilizing what we are essentially getting rid of, the CO2. Yeah. Also, a little side comment is the plants are also what they're getting rid of is oxygen, which is what we need. So you can kind of see it's very much a kumbaya. We help each other out. And then the water part of the equation is coming in from the roots. So the plants will absorb moisture from their roots. Anybody that's been growing tropicals for a long enough time will also know that plants can also absorb water through other structures. So aerial roots, which are not necessarily in the soil, possibly even their leaves and their stems sometimes, but that is a different topic altogether. And then the light that they're using, that the most crucial part of photosynthesis is going to come from things like the sun, if you've got plants by a window, or possibly a grow light if you're growing your plants under a grow light. Anybody also who has ever had something like an aquarium or a pond that is clear enough to look through might be able to notice this kind of release of oxygen as well. Like you might see some of your underwater plants, you'll see tiny little air bubbles that are forming around the leaves. They might then get released and everything, but those plants also photosynthesize and they are releasing oxygen, the byproduct of their photosynthesis. And one for a bit of the plant nerds out there, does this make a bit more sense when a lot of us are talking about the fact that photosynthesis in a variegated plant can be a bit challenging, yeah? And let me bring you an example so you can kind of understand. So this is a philodendron white princess. So you can see the variegated sections really clearly because it's a lily white variegation, and you can see the green parts of the leaves that are photosynthesizing. And you can see the other leaves as well. Now, what you might see is this leaf here has got a lot more green than white. This leaf has got a lot more white than green. All the white sections of the leaf do not photosynthesize. So if you just use your imagination really quickly and just imagine that entire leaf and kind of delete the white section. So you could almost see the green parts as what's left of that leaf. So that leaf isn't entire. That green bit is the only bit that is photosynthesizing. This is actually better at photosynthesizing. It might not have what we want, which is the variegation visually, because that's pleasing to us. But in essence, these leaves aren't necessarily helping the plant. So the leaves that have got more green, or the green sections of the plant as a whole, are the ones that are supporting the fact that this freeloader, which is the variegated part, isn't doing anything. It still needs everything that the photosynthesis creates, but it's not helping towards that creation. It's not a team player. But let's dive into a bit more about photosynthesis and the more nitty-gritty elements that make it what it is. We've talked about what it does, but what in essence is it? And let's talk about leaves specifically. They're essentially, if you think about it in a very kind of simplistic way, they are kind of nature's solar panels. Yeah, the same way that you would have solar panels on your house, or anything that has got a little solar panel that you can use to get free energy to power things. The leaves are kind of doing the same kind of thing. And what is the part of the leaf that kind of facilitates photosynthesis is something called chlorophyll. And chlorophyll, and I think there's another element that is chloroplasts, which is what creates the chlorophyll. Both of these elements, if I'm not mistaken, one of them might be transparent. I cannot remember. I will correct myself up here. But chlorophyll is almost 100% of the time green, which is why we have green plants. And you can understand quite how much of all of these leaves is, or the plant as well, sometimes the tropicals don't necessarily always have like bark or have kind of what you would have on a tree, a trunk, which isn't green and that doesn't photosynthesize. But you might have stems or petioles that are green. Even those parts of the plant have got photosynthetic capabilities. They might not be as efficient as a leaf, but they can also photosynthesize. And you can understand now what I was talking about before when it came to the variegated plants is that entire white section that I was just showing you a moment ago doesn't have any chlorophyll in it. It's as simple as that. And something that, again, isn't discussed very often, especially when you're looking at things like variegated plants, is that sometimes you might have a green leaf on top or slightly lighter green leaf on top, and underneath it is kind of like white or kind of a grayish color. Imagine the leaves have got like 3 layers, and when you get a fully lily white leaf like what I was just showing you, that's fully white all the way through, it means that top layer, middle layer and bottom layer, they have all got the chlorophyll lacking. When you get those different patinations and the different colorations within the variegation, that is because maybe one layer, maybe the top layer has got variegation and the other 2 have got chlorophyll in them, or the bottom layer or the middle layer. So there's all of these things that can happen. Don't even get me started on something that's called blister variegation, where sometimes you get air bubbles, and that's when you get plants that have got a silvery sheen to them. So yes, you can understand now why chlorophyll is as important as it is, because if it's the thing that is doing photosynthesis in plants, which, say it with me, is what the plant needs in order to create its own food and live, survive, live, it would make sense that all of the plants are green. If chlorophyll, for example, was red, guess what color all of our plants would be? Correct, red. Everything would be absolutely red. So it kind of makes sense that that is the case. Now, people might ask me about plants that have got, and I'm trying to see if I've got one that I can maybe pick up. Not at the moment, but I'll see about putting a picture here. 2 examples. One of leaves that have got different colors other than green, or leaves that are black, or at least appear black to us. Now, the interesting thing is, with the colorful leaves, there is a different way that they can kind of utilize it, and there's usually a green part of the leaf somewhere, even if that green part looks black. And I'm kind of looking at my Begonia brevirosa, which is way too big, but it is fuchsia pink, and it's got like what it looks like black lines amongst it, kind of leaves, the veination. And you'll see by the picture what I mean. That black is not black. Same thing with something like a ZZ Raven. That plant is not black. It looks black to us. It is a very, 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 very deep green. Which, if you look at something like a Begonia brevirosa, it would make sense. If 50 or more % of its leaf is a different color that maybe isn't photosynthesizing because it doesn't have the chlorophyll, it's got other kind of elements to it, you would want that veination, that only part that is green, to be as densely packed as possible. It makes sense. The deeper the green, the more chlorophyll there is, the more densely packed that chlorophyll. Same thing with a ZZ Raven, or same thing with any plant that is quote unquote black. So let's talk about some basic leaf anatomy. So the first thing is something called a stomata, and stomata in Greek, and I've talked about this in other videos, is the Greek word stoma or stomata, which is plural, is just mouth or mouths. So these cells on the leaf structure, if you look at them, and hopefully I'll find a picture or a video and put it here, it's very difficult to find pictures that I can share on here that got stomata very clearly. They look like a mouth, they look like 2 lips essentially, and what this does is it opens and closes in order to facilitate for transpiration or gas exchange. I always get this wrong. Transpiration is when like moisture is released, or the exchange of moisture essentially, and exchange of gases is obviously when, we were talking about this before, CO2 is absorbed and O2, oxygen, is released. So there's stomata, there's the mesophyll, which again, based on the Greek word mesi or meso, is middle, and phil or philo is leaf. So the middle of the leaf is where the mesophyll would live. And then you've got the chloroplast, which I talked about briefly before, which again, if I'm not mistaken, is what is creating the chlorophyll. which is then needed, sorry, I keep going back on this, but I'm hoping to kind of connect all the dots for people, is needed in order to create the chlorophyll, which the chlorophyll is then what creates what goes through the process of photosynthesis, yeah? So let's talk about why light matters. So light levels and also light duration, which is something that not a lot of people will touch on. We'll also cover things like shade and what that actually means, and also things like grow lights. So first, let's go to the very basics. Something that hopefully might make sense is the different light levels have different photosynthetic rates. Make sense? So if something is really, really bright, it's going to be really conducive to photosynthesis. If something has got very, very low light, it's going to be harder to photosynthesize from that. And when I say more or less light, this could also mean duration. And that's key here as well. It's not just because things in nature don't happen in a silo or don't happen in a bubble. So if you think about it, say you're standing in a garden or out in nature and you'll see the sun rise, go up above you and then fall behind you basically. So depending on where the plant is, those light levels are going to change throughout the day. So say for instance, as I'm kind of pointing, if the sun is going up and down in this direction and there is a tree here, for example, but not one here, what you might get is, yes, you could, in theory, if there wasn't a tree the plant, could be getting a lot of light at this stage. But because the tree is there, the light levels are going to be lower. However, when the sun goes above that tree and is above me in the middle, I am getting the full weight of that sun. And as it's going behind, it is kind of tapering off and it's going towards the sunset. Those light levels will start to diminish. Does that make sense? And then also this is why people say that it's important to think about duration. So duration of light is how long, for example, if I want the primo light, which I was talking about, is the one that's in the middle when the sun is above me, the plant, essentially. How long is the light there for? This is becoming very basic because obviously you're still getting light from behind the tree as well, and even when it's sunsetting. But if we ignore those two things for now, and all I want is this light, how many hours is the sun giving me that full light exposure that I need as a plant that loves being in direct light? That's the first thing. That's direct light we're talking about here. And that is the duration of light. So bringing this into grow lights, which is why a lot of people are like, you know what, if you're going to run a grow light, you're gonna need to run it for 12 to 14 hours. Sometimes possibly crouching into 16 hours. And it is because of volume of light. It's not just the intensity of the light, it's also how many hours it's available to that plant at the level that it needs. Now, the reality for grow lights, yeah? The reality for grow lights is it's very difficult even for the ones that are not LED grow lights and for the ones that are LED grow lights. Even if you have it cranked up to the full, I'm imagining that, say for instance, you've got a cactus underneath a grow light. If you're just switching on that grow light for an hour or two a day, go, oh, it's got loads of light, look, a couple of hours of light. That full intensity there is still not going to be anywhere near as bright as the light levels that it's going to get if it's outside in direct sun all day long. So that's why duration sometimes, or most of the times, matters, because what you're trying to do there is balance out that volume. So if that machine, the grow light, isn't producing enough kind of strength of light to be to run it only for like a couple of hours, what you want to do is, based on how little that is able to create, because it's not the sun, you just need to give it a much longer period. Make sense? So smaller amounts over a longer period equals the same total amount. Larger amounts for a shorter period of time, same amount. Make sense? Now let's talk about the bright indirect light of it all and what it means in the realities of where some of these plants are coming from, yeah? Same thing goes for houseplants, same thing goes for the plants outside in somebody's garden. When you're reading labels or reading up any information on some of these plants. So with a lot of tropical plants, by and large, any information that you're going to be finding online that is not coming from scientific articles is going to be based on household conditions, correct? So they might say bright indirect light. So you might think, you know what, it's the summer, I'm going to take my houseplants and take them outside and give them bright indirect light, and they're going to do really, really well. And you end up frying your plants. Because you need to remember that bright indirect advice for houseplants is bright indirect light in the house. What that actually means if you're taking your plant outside, because again, remember where these plants are originally coming from, also add a layer to that, that the growers have been growing them for very, very long in conditions that would mimic your house so that they don't struggle when they come into your house. You're going to need to put them in deep shade, at least in the beginning of your garden. So heavily covered, somewhere where it's like massively underneath a tree, anything like that is where they're going to do their best. There is still a chance that the light levels might still be too high, because whatever light you're getting in the house is not going to be anywhere near as much as what you're going to be getting even underneath a tree in something like, say, your garden. So start that in deep shade, and then if you see that it's struggling a bit, then move it slightly, still within shade. You're always going to have your plants in shade if you're growing a house plant outside, but maybe less shade. So that's the first thing that you kind of need to remember. Same thing goes for anybody transitioning something like a succulent or a cacti from an indoor condition outdoors. Because you're just like, it's direct light. Look, it's in my brightest window. I'm going to put it in the middle of the sunniest part of my garden and watch your succulent or cacti go a bright, bright red or purple or anything like that, because it's getting sun stressed. It's gone from lower light levels, even though it's super bright in your house, to the scorching surface of the sun outside. You're gonna need to transition it. It will still be okay in direct light in the garden, because obviously that's where it's coming from in its natural environment, but you're gonna have to transition that slowly. So what can too much light or too little light look like in terms of your plant? So, let's start with too much light. Too much light, you might get leaves, and I'll hopefully find a picture and put it here, or that is kind of blown out by the light. So it's actually getting stressed enough that you're also destroying the chlorophyll within that leaf, especially if it's scorching. So you're giving it so much light that it doesn't know what to do with itself, but you're also bursting some of the structures or destroying some of the structures, because essentially you're essentially frying the plants. Can some plants adjust? Yes. Note what I was talking about before, that you can transition them. It just, if you do it in one go and you don't end up like severely harming the plants, it will eventually adapt, but it might not look great until it adapts. So bear that in mind. But yeah, so that is destroying some of the ways that that plant can absorb the light, because part of those leaves are getting destroyed because they are getting bleached by the sun. Obviously, you're not putting bleach on the plants. I'm just saying. Need to put a disclaimer. And then if it's lower light levels, what you might then notice sometimes with some plants is that the leaves will start going much, much darker. Because remember what we were talking about before about the black or really, really dark leaved plants, is they've got very densely packed chlorophyll. Now, this leaf here, and I don't know if it's coming up on the camera, isn't as dark as it could be. It's a nice kind of green color that I would expect from any kind of leaf. However, if I was to show you a leaf that is lower down, and I'll see if I can find a picture on here and maybe put them side by side so you can kind of see the difference. The lower leaves, which are not getting the primo light, it might not be as obvious, but hopefully it will be in the two pictures, is darker, denser chlorophyll in order to be able to utilize that lower light level as much as possible. The brighter, lighter color leaves don't need to have such deeply packed chlorophyll because light is available to them in abundance. So just bear that in mind. It also does have an effect on moisture absorption. So if a plant is expecting higher levels, and a lot of the plants that have got very densely packed chlorophyll, you might have noticed they're not as thirsty as maybe lighter green-leaved plants because they are adapted to deal with lower light levels, thus they have more densely packed chlorophyll. And let's talk about the purple grow lights for a moment, because I know a lot of people when they're first starting off, they look at the purple grow lights, which is red and blue light together, because the theory behind that and the notion behind that was, you know what, leaves are green. Essentially, they are reflecting back the part of the light spectrum that they cannot utilize. So why provide them with that color on the color spectrum or that color of light if they're not going to utilize it? So the theory was give it red and blue and that will be everything that that plant needs in order to photosynthesize more effectively. However, research has moved past that and a lot of the people have gone, hold on a minute. That's not the full story, because when they did do that and they did use those kind of purple lights as grow lights, and don't get me wrong, they can still work, but they then, a lot of the scientists said, no, you need full spectrum, you need the full light spectrum, you need all of it, you need the entire rainbow in order for the plants to do everything they need to do as efficiently as possible, because, say it with me, in nature, when you go outside, it is not a purple sun. It's got all the different colors of the spectrum, which means that these plants are adapted to having the entirety of it all. I haven't gone into too much detail, but I know in order for it to do everything that it needs to do, even when it comes to photosynthesis, it is better if it does have the full spectrum of light. I'll bring this into a more kind of human kind of understanding. So if you were to take something like a meal replacement shake, it will have potentially everything that it needs. That's the purple light. But after a while, you probably aren't going to be surviving on that long term because you're still going to be missing potentially trace elements that maybe are not in that meal replacement shake. Do you see what I mean? It's not the same as a full healthy meal. The full healthy meal in the situation would be the full spectrum of light. So, top tip, if you are looking for grow lights and if you can afford it, because I know they tend to be slightly more expensive, go for full spectrum grow lights. Your plants will thank you for it. Your eyes and your partners and friends and family, when they come into a house that doesn't have like the pink and purple lights glaring at them, because you might think in the beginning, it'll be fine. How bad can it be? Trust me, it's bad. You don't want that. You really don't. So let's talk about water and also things like gas exchange. We talked about this just a second ago when it came to things like stomatas on the leaves. And you might say, okay, when it comes to water, you know that it's getting absorbed by the roots of the plants and it's moving up towards the rest of the plants. That is called the transpiration stream, if I'm not mistaken. So that absorption and that movement of water from the roots all the way into the branches, stems, petioles, leaves of the plant. That is how that water is moving through the plant. And again, touching briefly on the stomata, it is that kind of exchange of gases and also potentially that water loss. I did an entire video that I dived into this a lot more when it came to kind of humidity levels, but you might be sitting there going, well, why is my plant not doing as well as it could? I've got it in primo conditions, it's in a terrarium, it's got high levels of humidity. But can it transpire? Because again, if it's high levels of humidity outside of the leaf and there's a lot of water that needs to be released from it, that water vapor will only move out towards a lower concentration of moisture. And if your humidity level is 100% here and it's 100% here, it ain't moving. If it's 100% here and say extreme here, 20% here, yes, it will move out really quickly because it's trying to fill that gap of moisture in the atmosphere. And this brings me nicely into why a lot of the tropical plants might actually like the higher levels of humidity. And this is something that, again, I don't know if that many people have connected the dots on this one. The reason why, and it might seem counterintuitive when you're first starting, going, these plants are coming from rainforest. What do you mean I need to let it dry out? It would never dry out in nature. It does. Because the thing you need to remember about rainforests is, yes, it might rain quite frequently, but between the rain, there is a chance for whatever substrate they're growing in can dry out quite quickly. Remember, it's very loose. So you're talking don't think about what you're growing them in the house. In nature, they might be growing in nooks and crannies of like the trees. They might be growing just on top of the soil level, between leaves and little bark segments and all these things. There's nothing that's really holding that moisture there. So actually, if it's not raining for, say, 12 hours, that's enough time for that situation where they're growing in to dry out quite considerably. What then does help, remember what I was talking about before, the humidity outside of the leaf and the humidity inside of the leaf, or the moisture inside of the leaf. If it's dried out, so whatever it's growing in the roots is dried out, but the humidity level is high enough, the opposite can work as well, going, you know what, I'm actually kind of thirsty, but there's no more water coming in from my roots. But there's a lot of humidity around me. I'll open my stomatas and absorb that humidity. It might not be as effective or as efficient as it might be coming in from the roots, but I'm still getting sips of water enough to survive until the next rainfall. Does that make sense? So that's why a lot of the time the edict is give it higher levels of humidity, because that's what they are used to. Now use that kind of knowledge to the best of your ability when you're growing your plants. So I'll give you an extreme example. If you are an overwaterer and you have everything at 90 or 100% humidity, guess what's going to happen? Way too much moisture. It's just like, here, take all the water that you can drink, and you are surrounded by an ocean of water as well. Too much. Too much. So let's talk a bit more about things that you might notice when it comes to photosynthesis on your plants. First thing is going to be something called chlorosis. Chloros in Greek is something that's kind of doesn't look well, looks sickly, looks a bit yellow. So chlorotic leaves tend to be slightly on the yellow side. A lot of the times this might signify that the photosynthesis levels are getting quite low. So for instance, if you're seeing a leaf yellowing on a plant, it might be, if it's very old leaf, it might be getting chlorotic because it's getting ready to sunset, retire, so that the plant can keep growing further up. It served its purpose. It was one of its first few leaves. It's now kind of aging out, so it's not photosynthesizing anywhere near as efficiently as some of the top leaves within that plant. So that is part of kind of understanding a bit more about chlorosis. If you are also getting chlorosis everywhere else and it's at a very large levels, that's a different issue. You might have root rot at that point. Check it out. Now, when it comes to pruning, so again, I'll give you an extreme example. So say pruning might also be taking cuttings because I know nobody really wants to prune. We don't think that maybe it's a good idea to prune a plant like you would do in the garden in the house. You're just like, no, it needs to keep all of its leaves. But no, say you're taking cuttings or say you are actually pruning it back. You need to always remember the ratio of material still on the plant, not just the leaves that we're talking about before, the stems, potentially the petioles, they can all photosynthesize as well. If you've taken away, say, 70% of that plant's ability to photosynthesize, you've slowed it down considerably. So just keep that in mind when you're doing any cuttings or prunings. Don't go to the full extreme. I know the people that have watched me recently, especially in my most recent repot, where I took every single leaf off and left the stems that were green. There was a reason for that. Sometimes that can help to get vigor back in the plant, especially if you're getting rid of sections of the plant that might have pest infestation. Your plant can bounce back. What you might then need to adjust is maybe give it a tiny bit more light, because if all you've got is the stems, they've only got so much chlorophyll in them in terms of volume. Remember we talked about before volume, and maybe give it a touch more light in order for it to be able to utilize that smaller level of chlorophyll, because you removed all of the leaves, in order to do that, and maybe pull back on the watering, because you've got a whole bomb ton of roots down below, but not an awful lot up at the top. So you need to balance it out. And I might be hearing the people in the back going, what about fertilizer? Fertilizer, because everybody's like, this is plant food. And I think that's where the confusion happened. The main food for the plants, the glucose that's being produced, is being produced by photosynthesis. What you need to think about when it comes to fertilizer, that is what powers the engines that go through the process of photosynthesizing. Those elements, the phosphorus, the nitrogen, the potassium, I always forget the potassium, and all of the other trace minerals as well, is what is helping the plant in order to photosynthesize. Does that make sense? So for instance, the food, in the situation of bringing it into human terms, the food is the light, yeah? So you're eating the food. But in order to eat the food, you're gonna need kind of cutlery, correct? Cutlery, I'm really stretching this like example as much as it can be, could be what that kind of fertilizer is doing. It's giving you the tools, or it's what's kind of powering the photosynthesis. I think I might have like messed that one up slightly. You know what I mean. You still need fertilizer, but it's not food for the plant. It's what's helping power the engines that create the food for the plant. Which is part of the reason why a lot of the times, especially when you're thinking about light levels, is why a lot of people are going, you know what, if you've got a plant and it's against the window and it's getting light this way, I'm the plant, the light is coming this way, you need to rotate that plant in order for it to be able to photosynthesize all the way around. Otherwise you will get something called etiolation, which is when you get the plant leaning towards the light, because it knows that the light is coming here. And you might even get it sacrificing some, if it never moves, you might get it sacrificing the leaves on this side in order to push more leaves to this side, because it knows that this is where it's getting the light levels. It's not getting anything from here. This is pitch dark for it. This is where it needs to be. So always a good idea to rotate your plants. And one thing that I never do, and I know everybody says that you need to do this, and we should all be doing this, even in my space in here, wipe your leaves. You would be surprised how dusty households are. Because what that is doing, if you imagine like there's a leaf here, and it's like what's creating all the like photosynthesis, what's doing all the photosynthesis, and it's got a layer of dust, and then another season of dust, and then another season of dust. And by the time you've noticed dust on your leaves, there's probably a thick layer of dust on that leaf. It's like you've put a net curtain over your plants. And then the next year, if you haven't cleared it, another net curtain, and then another net curtain. And then essentially that plant is like, I'm trying to get as much light as I possibly can through all of these layers of net curtain. Does that kind of paint a bit of a picture? So it's a good idea to wipe your leaves. Dust your leaves, make sure that that dust is coming off. And if you've had a plant for a very long period of time that's maybe not looking its best, it's not photosynthesizing as much as it could, but nothing has changed, it's still in the same position, check that it's not got like a massive layer of dust over all of its leaves, because essentially you've just like slowly but surely made sure that it cannot photosynthesize as efficiently as it was able to prior. So I'll wrap it up here, because this is already, I'm looking at the camera. It's a bit of a longer video than I thought it was going to be. Sorry. Can you tell that I like geeking out about the science of plants? Because I am inherently a nerd. So what did you think? Did you know most of this? Did you kind of know this from school and maybe forget some of this? Is some of this new to you? And hopefully, if you've maybe struggled to understand photosynthesis in the past, hopefully this kind of, for me, is a more simplistic way of looking at photosynthesis. I'm sure that this can get even more simplified. Hopefully it helps you understand your plants, what they do, in order to keep on doing their thing, really. They need light, they need to be able to photosynthesize, and all the other processes that go hand in hand in order to make these green things that we love caring for survive and thrive sometimes. So yes, hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.